And cost, I think, is one of the biggest prohibitors of getting into a class, especially if it's an out-of-hospital class, because who's got $400 or $500, right? If you know you're going to need a childbirth class because you're pregnant, you're 1 second pregnant, can you start putting $50 away a month right now for that? Can you put on your registry, don't give me a present, we just want to pay for our doula and our childbirth education? Because people will still give you $50 and a present because everyone has to buy for that baby. There are ways to get that covered early on if you're thinking about it. Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. Well, this week's episode comes right at the time of our 1-year anniversary of when we started the podcast last September. So there's so many things I could do to recap what we've done this year and what has happened. This podcast has been so much work and such a labor of love. And actually, I love all the things of it. I love the editing. I love the finding the guests. I love talking to everybody. It's been a joy and a lot of work. And when it comes to what the podcast foundation is, it's education. It's childbirth education. It's why we need to be educated. And Ashley and I thought today would be the perfect opportunity to wrap all of last year's episodes into one episode. And we've also got a PDF for you that kind of recaps this episode. And many of you are already in childbirth education. That's probably why you found our podcast. But this is one that you're going to be able to send to other people that are newly pregnant, that are in the process of even thinking about becoming pregnant, because the more they understand about birth, the less they sit in fear, the more they're going to enjoy their birth, and the less their baby sits in fear. And I think that's one of the missing pieces with childbirth education is people aren't considering that there's a baby involved and that it's their birth and that they get born one time. And all the decisions we make or don't make actually affect this new baby and kind of sets their patterns in life. And there are so many options for childbirth education, whether it's bits and pieces on YouTube, full classes, information that you're getting from families that did the kind of birth that you want to have. But it's important that you start. And a few families that I've talked to recently, and I know Ashley has too, they didn't get any education right before, but they're looking for a doula at the last minute because they were so scared, they just didn't want to think about it. While I understand that, they're like, anxiety is so high, etc. Understanding the playing field levels it out, and that can actually lower your anxiety. And that's kind of the purpose of what we wanted to talk about today.
I think, literally mention getting education in every single episode, every topic. It doesn't matter what topic we're talking about. It doesn't matter if we're doing a birth story. It always comes back to education, because if you don't know your options, you don't have any, which is something you will hear us say all the time. And childbirth education isn't about knowing everything or somehow wanting to control everything, which is, I think, kind of a misunderstanding. I'll hear families say, I'm not going to take a class or get any kind of like education because I know I can't control anything the day of anyways. But really having that foundation of even just a basic knowledge of what to expect, especially with your first baby, is huge in terms of making sure that you have the best possible experience. And studies have shown that getting educated, having some childbirth education, reduces your risk of birth trauma. It reduces your risk of postpartum depression. It reduces your risk of, even further than postpartum depression, of childbirth related PTSD. And it improves outcomes both for the birthing parents and for the babies to have that basis of education. So you're going to hear us say till we're blue in the face forever and ever that the biggest key to having a positive birth experience and to getting the birth that you hope to have is having education on your side. And so that's what we're going to dig into today, is how to find the right education for you and how to make the most of the education that you choose.
So one of the reasons I hear parents saying, I don't even know what kind of birth I want, and if I'm just going to go to the hospital and they're going to do everything, they know everything, so why should I get educated? I understand that. So let's just give you an idea of what you could have and you can look into to see if it's right for you. You can have an unmedicated birth at a hospital. You can have a partially unmedicated and then medicated birth at a hospital. You can have an unmedicated birth at home. You can have an unmedicated birth at a birth center. Some birth centers use nitrous oxide, so you still have a little bit of pain relief. So those are options, maybe in your area, maybe not. 98% of us are going to birth in the hospital. So that's why a lot of parents just say, I don't know what I want. They know everything. I trust my doctor. It's going to be fine. Awesome that you trust your doctor. However, you can't really trust the system. Hospitals are made to make money. They are made to turn those beds over like a conveyor belt and get you in and out as fast as possible. And if you have better insurance, you stay longer. Back in the 80s, when my sister was having babies, you were in and out before 24 hours because the insurance didn't cover it. So literally you were checked out by 23 hours. How come from that time to now, we're at the hospital for 2 or 3 days? Just for observation, or just because you want an extra day, because your insurance pays well. That's why. And if there's no one else that needs that bed, the longer you stay in that expensive hotel, the more money they make. So I'm not saying don't birth in a hospital at all, because a hospital was my first choice as well. However, understand that your needs are not put first in a conveyor belt system. So while you may trust your doctor, and that's awesome, you still need to understand what's going to be done to your body and why we're speeding things up and how you can lower your risk of having a cesarean. Because having that cesarean is going to mitigate and dictate what's happening in your future reproductive life, as well as your physical life. So understanding what your options are and what kind of birth you want. If you know I want a natural birth, you're obviously going to lean towards natural birth classes. But we want to make sure those are balanced, because if something changes in that birth plan or in baby's birth plan, you're going to want to have the tools for that and the education for that. And even if you're birthing out of the system, you're going to do a home birth or you're going to do a birth center birth, and you think, I have a midwife, I don't need a class. Yeah, you do. What happens if you end up transferring and now you need medical assistance or medical intervention and you have no clue what that is? I will tell you, one of the best statistics is that if you transferred in from a home birth, normal, low risk mom having a baby, your risk of cesarean is 6%. If you walk into a hospital low risk and that's where you're getting your care, your risk is 33% for a cesarean. So because you've been cared for with midwives and you've done more natural things and they are keeping you low risk as much as possible, you already are lowering your risk by going to the hospital. However, to keep that low, you need to understand what kind of things are going to be proposed and what you're going to be choosing. Sometimes you won't have a choice. Like the reason we're transferring in is because we need a surgical birth. But there are times when you can slow things down, make different decisions, say no to things, and also say yes to the things that you need. Just because you're doing a birth out of the hospital with a midwife, it doesn't mean you don't need education. You still need coping skills. You still need tools for labor. If your midwife can cover all of that education, fantastic. If not, you're going to need something supplemental.
And I think something that specifically for home birth families, but even for families going to the hospital, that people don't really consider is whether you're going to your birth team or your birth team's coming to you, there's a big part of your labor that you're doing on your own, right? You don't just automatically get medical care the second you think you might be in labor. So education is for understanding how labor moves, for understanding how to cope with labor, for understanding how to keep yourself as comfortable as possible, how to stay home, how to wait to call the midwife. And so your education isn't just for, well, once I'm receiving care, I need tools to communicate with my team. No, you actually need tools to know how to move your body, how to control your breathing, how your partner can touch you and help you. And again, another big point is the tools for the partner to be able to be that support for you, especially if it's both of your first babies. How are they going to know how to help you, how to care for you, and what's normal? And so I think that understanding that education benefits everybody, no matter where you're birthing and no matter what type of care you're receiving, because labor is not just, I think I'm in labor and now I have all the medical care in front of me. And
And
that's it.
Ashley, don't you think that's one of the
Experience.
sexiest parts about teaching classes with partners? Because they come in and they're like, how many weeks is this? And how many hours is this? And they're almost groaning, but they want to be there for their partner. Like they're there for their woman, right? But by the end of our 5-week series, the change in them and the confidence level in them and the understanding of the process. We had a birth story come in this week that dad was so funny and goofy in class, and they were having little arguments because things weren't going the way she wanted them to go with him and stuff like that. By the end of class, he was so confident, so excited, and then they rocked their birth. He knew exactly what to do and how to fend the mother-in-law off and how to keep it protected, and he was so confident. And watching him catch his baby on the video and how he laughed and giggled while it was happening was phenomenal to see. And when he came in, you wouldn't have known that. And once he got the education and the understanding, it was the sexiest, funniest birth experience.
Yeah, it's such a good point. That is, we might be so scared that we think we might be overwhelmed by education, or that education is not going to benefit us, or that we don't need it. But especially if we have a partner, if we have someone supporting us, whether that's a spouse, a romantic partner, a parent, a friend, think about their perspective as the person supporting you and how they could be the best support to you, and how we could make this experience less intimidating or scary for them. Remember, they're not in your body going through this. They're only witnessing what's happening from the outside. And so if they have tools to understand, number one, what's happening, so they're not scared, to normalize it for them. But number two, to really be able to show up for you in a way that's going to make your labor easier, why wouldn't we do that? Right? Why wouldn't we create the best possible experience for ourselves? So not only is education for us giving birth, but it's for the people supporting us as well. And that's why we love teaching our class with partners, whoever their birth support is, in attendance with them, because it makes them a better partner, a better support person. I personally love getting sisters and grandmas who are supporting like single parents or parents with deployed spouses, that the person showing up for them in the birth room isn't their romantic partner, and watching the things click into place for them as well is so cool to see, and them realizing like, wait, I can help them.
I just had a mother, well, I went to drop off placenta pills, and she said, I wasn't prepared for that, except as I watched all of your class videos and as I talked to my daughter about how this was going to go, she said, when watching her be and looked like that much pain because of her face and what she was going through. And she goes, but then afterwards, when we debriefed and talked about it, I had a different perspective of what was actually happening. And I knew I had to keep a poker face and I had to be strong. And she goes, but inside I was dying watching her go through this. And she said, but then to talk to her about it, she had a whole cocktail going on. She was coping great. But watching my baby go through that, and she said, if I hadn't been able to watch those videos and talk to you guys through a little bit of this ahead of time, I think I would have said something I shouldn't have said. Do you want to be rescued? Because I wanted to rescue her. And she said she had a 6-hour birth. She didn't need to be rescued, but it was overwhelming to watch that. But because of the information I had before, it kept me from saying something I shouldn't have said. I'm like, you're right. There's one reason that my mom didn't come, because she wouldn't have kept it to herself. So
But you bring up another really good point when we're honing in this conversation of like why you would take classes and what type of birth you're planning, and how that all goes together, is that the people supporting you need to be on the same page with you for the type of birth that you want. And the people that love you are going to want to rescue you, like that grandma, like our partners, especially if you have a partner that's a fixer. And taking a class that helps them understand that this is normal, that your body can do this, your why, especially if you're looking to have a natural birth experience, your why you might want a natural birth, and that really gets brought into light through education, is going to help them support you in achieving the birth that you want, rather than trying to rescue you, trying to fix it, rather than your team looking at this as like a medical event that you need treatment for. Being able to step to the side and allow you to go through this while supporting you, rather than trying to stop it or fix it or make it better with medication. I know for Kara and I, that's something we really try to hammer home to partners, is that when they are saying, I can't do this or this is hard, they're not necessarily saying, call anesthesia and get me medication. And I know if we didn't have that conversation with partners, so many of them would be like, fix this, fix this, fix this, make this go away, make this better. And so education helps you and your partner and your team get on the same page about what your goals are, what's important to you, how you want to be approached, how you want to be talked to, how you want to be supported and coached if plans need to change. Like, how are they going to help you handle those transitions? And so education is just such a broad spectrum of the type of births that it serves, the parts of your birth that it serves, the parts of your birth team that it serves. Really, it is for everybody involved in the birth process. It kind of leads us to the conversation about starting down the path of looking for classes, what types of classes you might be seeking. And typically, you'll see things divided into two categories where we have out of hospital classes and hospital classes. And I'll let Kara talk about the hospital classes in a minute, but I want to specifically talk about what you might find when you're looking at out of hospital birth classes. There are classes that are tailor made for natural birth that are designed for not using medication and only using physical techniques of breathing and comfort measures to go through your birth experience. It's all about your mind and body and what you already have innately in you, and then also what you're going to be creating in your environment and with your team around you to keep you as comfortable as possible. They are really great, especially if you are looking for that out of hospital birth experience. For the most part, if you can find a class that's very well-rounded, beneficial no matter where you're birthing. But Kara and I know, and we have experience with our clients, that there are some classes that are so geared towards natural birth that they don't talk about backup plans or hospital procedures or anything like that. And so they can be so narrowly focused on the natural birth experience that they might leave some families, especially that are seeking a natural birth, but maybe doing it in the hospital setting, looking for more information. And so when we talk about natural birth classes, as we'll talk about later in the episode, we want to find classes that can hit that balance between natural techniques, mindset shifting, environmental factors, and helping you understand your options when it comes to changes of plan, backup plans, course shifting if you end up in the hospital, or if you're birthing in the hospital to start with. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about natural birth classes, that we're not looking for classes that are so focused on natural birth and no medication for any reason or by any means that you feel like you still don't have any options, right? So that's one end of the spectrum. And Kara, maybe you could talk about the other end of the spectrum.
When we're thinking about we don't have any options because that's all we're going to do, we're so rigid in our choice, right? That leads to fear if we think about intervention. And that fear can hold back our labor, et cetera, because we're still in the back of our minds worried, what if, what if, what if? Once we have both sides to it, it's not as scary. That dissipates the fear, which is going to keep the natural labor moving forward, which is what we want. So obviously the other side of the spectrum are hospital classes. That we do hospital classes for a variety of reasons. They're free, they're $50, they're way less than out of hospital classes. If we're going for a cesarean or we know we're getting an epidural no matter what, we don't really care about anything else other than the medical experience. And so we're just thinking a hospital class is fine. It totally is, because the hospital classes are geared towards, let's prepare you for what goes on here. This is an intervention we may offer. Here's how it works for food. Here's how it works for an induction. Here's how it works for a cesarean. Here's what we do with your baby after cesarean, before cesarean. Like all of that is included in a hospital class so that you know as a patient when you're in there what to expect. They are really good at covering their bases. They may touch on natural birth, barely. But what you need to understand with a hospital is they're experts in vaginal birth and cesarean birth, but not necessarily unmedicated birth. They are used to intervention. They're used to guiding the journey. They're used to scheduling the journey. And so an unmedicated birth is kind of a, woo, throw the dice in the air and see what happens. They are not used to supporting those. And if you have a hospital that's used to supporting those, that's very rare. And if you have a wing of the hospital that is used to supporting those, that's very rare. And you should cherish that and be very grateful for it, because it is not the norm. Whereas you might have one particular nurse that did all her babies at home, and she's like the expert nurse for all the hippies that come in. Awesome. That's the one you want. But know that hospital classes are going to be mostly geared towards patient care, our policies and procedures, what we do allow you to do and not allow you to do, and how to have a good hospital birth. I'm not saying they're bad or good. I'm just saying that's what they are. So I've had families that will take both classes. They'll take our hypnobirthing class and the hospital class to balance out that information and see what their hospital's policies and procedures are, how they register, because it covers everything. And then the kind of birth that they want. And then now they know how to fit it in to, okay, here's what's going on at the hospital and here's what's here. And I will say there are exceptions to all the rules that we're talking about today. We have a doula trainer in town who also teaches the hospital birth class. Hers are way different than the hospital teaches, right? She talks about doulas. She talks about options. She gives a lot of birth positions, things they can do at home before they go to the hospital, what their options are with water breaking. Even though the hospital says you come in right away, like she gives options. And I've had parents take my class and her class, and they're like, oh, you guys say the same things. I'm like, yeah, because she's an expert in vaginal natural birth, right? She's got her hospital policies and procedures, and she teaches options, which because she's been there for so long, she probably has more leeway into making it her class rather than the standard class.
Generally speaking, when we're talking about like generalities, right? Is we get a lot of students who find us after they've taken a hospital birth class because they can come out of those hospital classes very scared. And where we're based out of San Diego has a lot of hospitals, and definitely not all their classes are created equal. And some hospitals who have doulas teaching their classes definitely have better outcomes, and those students have better experiences and don't necessarily come banging down our door. But the hospital classes that are so focused on when you get your epidural, when you get your induction, when you get your cesarean, can have parents leaving those classes terrified, especially if they go in thinking, I don't know if I want medication, or I'm scared of hospitals. I'm scared of this. I'm scared of giving birth. Then they feel like, wow, I didn't really get any education on how to get through this. All I got was all these things are going to happen to you. And here's how we handle it as a hospital, which those are not tools,
I
right?
think the hard part about teaching, which is why I'd be fired if I taught in a hospital in like literally 3 seconds, they'd fire me. But I think the hardest part is if I'm teaching a massive class of 20 to 30 couples, not only don't I have the time to interact and squash all those fears or say it's really not that bad, because I have a curriculum I have to get through in a short amount of time to get everybody in and out, and then maybe take questions at the end. I might not have the specialty of talking through fears and one-on-one communication with a couple to see that their past trauma is feeding into this fear. And that's something that we can do as a boutique or out of hospital class is we can focus individually and cover those fears. And I don't want people to take a class and end up with more fear. That's the last thing we want to do. Still take the class and then find somebody to help you with those fears if they show up. Because you being scared of the hospital and not getting any education because you're too scared, I think is going to make you more scared because of the parents that have come and talked to me about it afterwards. I wish I had taken a class because I didn't know. And then when everything started happening, I felt like a stuck pig. I felt trapped, all the things that they didn't want because they didn't know they could have said no to this. They could have said yes to that. So I don't want hospital classes to be scary. I don't want natural birth classes to be scary. And those have been scary for parents before too. It's a matter of can you communicate with that educator or somebody else on the outside, even doing a consultation with somebody one time to say, here's my list of fears about this. I'm still birthing at this hospital or I'm still having this surgical birth. How can you help me through this? Because there are people who manage those fears and can help you with that.
I think you bring up a really good point about fear and how it impacts people. And I think when we have classes on these two extremes, whether it's like the extreme natural birth class, which is refuse all interventions, or here's all these scary interventions that the hospital offers you, is we put people in fight or flight mode going into their birth. And more often they end up in fight, and they go in with their fists up, ready to fight everybody who comes at them with a potential intervention or a discussion or an approach, or let's say there actually is an emergency happening and something really needs to happen. But we have these parents that are in this fight mode because they're so activated, and they've been taught, whether through what the class itself was teaching them, which is refuse everything, or by what they learned in the hospital class, which is this is all scary, that they're going to just fight off everything, and everything is a threat essentially to their bodies and their babies and their birthing experience.
And we're mammals. We don't want
Yes.
threats to mammals. It's not good.
I mean, the very bare minimum what we need to have a positive birth experience is to feel safe. And so the reality is what most families need and what most families are looking for when they're looking for classes. And I think what Kara and I try to do with our brand of hypnobirthing that we teach is something between the two extremes, where we are trying to make sure that they have tools in their minds and their bodies and their homes and in their partners to have a positive experience, but also have a very useful knowledge, because 99% of our families birth in the hospital or may potentially end up in the hospital, even if they're planning out of hospital births. And so, Care, in her infinite wisdom, when she started teaching hypnobirthing, realized there is something missing that these families need, because all of these parents coming to my classes are birthing in the hospital. How are we preparing them for hospital birthing? And recognizing that that really needed to be added to these amazing tools that hypnosis offers. And so, especially first time parents who have no knowledge, no prior birth experience, they know that they don't know things, right? They know that they're lacking knowledge. They know that they don't know what to expect, and they want to know a little bit of everything. They want those tools and they want to know what to expect going into the hospital. And that's really the approach that we take with our classes. So, knowing yourself and kind of what type of birth you want, or even if your jumping off point is, I don't know what kind of birth I want. Education is how you are able to narrow that down for yourself and figure out which direction you want to go in terms of the type of class that you're looking for.
And we have couples come into our classes all the time that say, I'm getting an epidural, but what do I do from early labor to 8 centimeters? Because I know I want that at the very end. I want to cope. I want to be able to do all these things. I want to stay home longer. I don't want to follow the exact path I'm supposed to follow for my OB. What do I do? And there's tricks with epidurals. In a class that's balanced, we can talk about that and say, okay, epidural, here's how you can lower your chance of a C-section with that. And here's how you can push with that. And I think our doula tools have come in to give us balance in our classes, because when you attend enough births, you see the variety of them and the tools that parents need. And flexibility is the number one thing. And all of us are type A control people. At least that's what I found, right?
So we end up in childbirth education and doula support.
Exactly. And, people pleasers, partners come in and they're the balance of that type A personality. And they're like, whatever, and we talk through that as well. So when you're looking at different kinds of classes, what is going to work for you is not what is going to work for everybody else. And cost, I think, is one of the biggest prohibitors of getting into a class, especially if it's an out of hospital class, because who's got $400 or $500, right? If you know you're going to need a childbirth class because you're pregnant, you're 1 second pregnant, can you start putting $50 away a month right now for that? Can you put on your registry, don't give me a present, we just want to pay for our doula and our childbirth education? Because people will still give you $50 and a present, because everyone has to buy for that baby. There are ways to get that covered early on if you're thinking about it. And I've never had a parent who didn't do that not get it all covered. Like, it's a way to do it. And if you're not pregnant yet, set money aside for that.
Flexible savings account and health savings accounts will pay for childbirth classes. They pay for our childbirth classes. They pay for doulas.
It's so important to save for that and to really make a conscious effort, because I know now, because doulas in San Diego are pretty pricey, they're choosing between a doula and childbirth education. And I would ideally like you to have both, especially with certain hospitals, right? And I also understand budgets, because now we're just trying to put food on our table. It's not an easy, uninflated place we're living in right now. So when you're looking at childbirth classes, there are some that are self-paced online. If you learn that way, great. Do you have access to that instructor, whoever is selling that course, where you can ask your individual questions about what's going on in your life? Do you have to pay an extra fee for that? Or can you send in your questions or add them into the chat and get those answers? Because that individualized attention to what you're going to be needing is pretty crucial. And that's one regret that I hear on second-time moms coming in, where they took a natural birth class or even a hospital class, but they didn't have all the answers they needed. And they felt like, okay, I think I've got it, but they didn't know what they didn't know. And they didn't have that interaction. So look at that. Is it an online course like we teach, where it's online but live? Everyone keeps their cameras on. It's really interactive. And some people say, I can't do an online class. I'm like, I get it, but mine's not a typical Zoom class. Just look at the reviews. You can talk to some of my other families that have taken it. It is very interactive, and we build community while we're doing it, which, because I've taken so many different trainings, I think I know how to do that now. But online classes aren't for everybody. I kind of like sitting in my jammies at home with my dog on my lap and food in my hand. watching a class and talking and interacting. And it's been working for us really well. So that works for us. Is your social anxiety also going to keep you from taking a class? Because that is another reason I think I get a lot of students is because they're like, I can't think of walking into those strangers every week. They get paranoid about it. You also have to think traffic, timing. You need to be at that class on time. If it starts at 6 or 6:30, everybody needs to be there on time because we've got so much curriculum to get through and we don't want to keep you till 9:30 or 10. Nobody wants that. You're already tired from a long day at work. So look at that timing and traffic and parking, especially if you're in a big metro city. It's hard to find parking sometimes and you're parking 8 blocks away and walking, or are you Ubering? That can cost more money. So look at that. Rural areas, is it snowy at the time you're having a baby and you're like, there's a blizzard coming, we're going to miss that class? Maybe online is going to work for you, but some kind of education that you're going to have to think ahead and plan for. Another thing too is how big are the classes? Are they held in an auditorium at a hospital and there's 25 couples in there? How much individualized attention are you getting? Are you getting breaks to move around? Are they comfortable? Even if you're taking with somebody at their house, is there enough seating that it's comfortable for you? Because 2 or 3 hours, I know we have changed our seating over and over when we were teaching live in person because they're not comfortable. And we've got to make sure there's chairs for some people, pads for other people, extra pillows for other people. There's a fan because everyone's pregnant and hot. Ask those questions because you definitely don't want to be worrying about your physical comfort while you're trying to focus because pregnant brain, like it's just a double-edged sword right there. Also, I think one of the biggest surprises that parents have is how long childbirth classes are. Like, we cannot cover what you need to know about childbirth, postpartum, maybe early parenting or whatever we're teaching in 2 weeks or in a crash course for 8 hours. Usually a childbirth series is 4, 5, 6 weeks. Some are longer than that. Bradley's can be up to 3 months, which is actually really paced. If we could give you a whole college semester, I would definitely do that because we're talking about bringing a baby into the world. There's so much information to give you, and we don't want to overwhelm you. We want to spread it out. And especially with hypnobirthing, we need you to practice those techniques every week and be working on that so that if you have questions, we can adjust along the way because those tools are making nice synapses and brain patterns in your brain so that you'll immediately fall into those during labor. We need that time. So when a parent asks me for a crash course, it's not fair for me to teach a crash course and I won't do it because you're not going to get what you need out of it. And that's a waste of your money and your time. So please plan ahead for that because childbirth classes are not just a 3-hour class. We do a comfort measures class for 3 hours, but that's usually in addition to something they've already taken at the hospital or what their doula has taught them and they just want some more practice with that.
I think people also underestimate just how crazy it gets at the end of pregnancy, like their lives preparing for the baby, between finishing up work and baby moons and baby showers and family coming into town and renovations.
The holidays are right around.
Holidays, oh my God. Yes, exactly. Really, you want to be looking ahead because all of this stuff matters. And when families ask me, should I take it when I'm 12 weeks? Should I take it when I'm 20 weeks? Should I take this 5-week class or the 6-week class or whatever? And I say, the most important thing that you should be looking for in a class is the best class that you and your partner can complete and attend every class. That should be your foundation for what you're looking for in a class, is that we
Absolutely.
can make it to all the classes or we can have makeup classes that my partner can attend all of them. And that way we get the most out of our investment that we are spending our time and money investing in this education. So when you're looking at your options, everything Kara just mentioned, you need to consider it. If it's too far of a drive, am I going to opt out of going? If parking's not good, am I going to opt out of going? Am I too anxious? Should I have taken an online class where I could be at home with my dog? And then the timing of it. Really think about like how hectic life is going to get right before that baby comes and time your class, even if it's like, God, this is really early. That's okay. Time it so that you can go, so that you can attend all 5 or 6 classes, so that you and your partner can get the maximum benefit from that education.
Like you can always do a refresher right before if you're taking it too early. And I've had families where they've got 3 or 4 months left and then they're still touching base with me like, hey, what about this? And what about that? And my doctor said this. And I'm still coaching them through. And then right before they're rewatching their videos, they're feeling grounded, they're doing practice. Yeah. If it means you get it in, take it early.
When we were still doing in person, I had a class with a family that was literally 12 weeks pregnant because they were moving away and they wanted to take our class before they moved away. And that was before we were doing Zoom and all of that stuff. And so that's what worked for them because they knew not only just moving away and this was the class they wanted, but logistically, once they were in the throes of moving and relocating to a new city and all of that, how would they even find a birth class that met their needs before their due date came upon them? And I know it can be really easy for us to say, like, just commit to a class, but we know how busy life is. Like, we know because we also have very busy lives.
Don't you think it's so much easier if you're 4 months pregnant and you're already looking down the road, you know which teacher you want, you know which just schedule it. And then it's on your calendar and it's before you schedule baby moons and showers and all of that. It's so much easier because I have so many families who are like, "Oh, well, I have a baby shower on that day and I have this on that day. And how am I going to make up those 2 Saturdays?" And I'm like, $100 a piece. I don't want to charge you for that, but I got to pay for my time too, right? The earlier, the better.
And what it comes down to, the whole reason why we harp on this and we really try to hammer this home is because you will only get out of your birth class what you put into it in terms of your time and attention. You can pay for a birth class, but if you don't show up for it, if you don't do the work, if you're not willing to put the time in after class to look at the materials and spend the time talking to your partner about it, how is it actually benefiting you? Right? You can't just throw money at your birth and hope that it's going to create a positive birth experience for you if you're not willing to put in the time, or if you're not able to put in the time and attention that it takes to actually absorb the information and learn the tools. So make it worth your while. Show up, plan ahead, choose a class that you're going to get maximum benefit from and really be able to be present for in order to allow it to create a positive birth experience for you and do what it needs to do for you and your family.
I have a big bias I'm going to tell you right now. I have a bias that when it comes to a childbirth education class, it needs to be balanced. And that's a hospital class or an out of hospital class. Can you give me both sides of the coin? I want to know what the science says. I want to know what my body has naturally done since the beginning of time says. I want a balanced class so that no matter where the baby is in that process, if things need to shake up, I'm covered. And if it's extreme to either side, the benefit is nothing for the parent, right? So when you're searching for an educator and you're searching for a curriculum that you want, that's why I'm going to give you that PDF so that you have certain things that may go, "Oh, yeah, I need to ask about that," because we try to think of every possible question that our parents have asked me. I've been interviewed so many times with parents over the last 15 years about, "What about this? And do you cover this?" And if I haven't covered it, I'm like, "Ooh, that's really good. I've added it." So please look through those questions and see as you're researching what you want to do. So if you go into a town and there's 10 hypnobirthing teachers, fantastic. Now you've got the method. 10 hypnobabies teachers, 10 birthing from within teachers, whatever it is, everyone's going to teach that class different. Everyone's going to have their own flavor, right? We're all different people. One of them might be super funny and you'll, "Oh, my husband's really going to dig that person," right? Someone might be very dry and very scientific, and that might be the engineer person that your husband needs to connect to, right? Because you're going to be balancing it with two people. What are you and your partner? How do you learn? And what are you going to need from that instructor? So it's important to call them and see what their times are and see how they teach and what do they cover and anything that's really important to you. Those are the questions you need to ask that educator because we are all created different. I am not the educator for everybody. I'm totally cool with that. I am cool with giving you 5 other names because I want you to have the right person that's going to work for you. And like attracts like. You will find the person that works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, what made you choose them? Because there's a reason. And sometimes it's like, well, that was the only person in town that had a class open. I get it. But there are people in other towns, if you do an online class, that might have, been a different choice for you. Start looking early. That's going to broaden and expand your choices in that.
We will often refer families, if they're not with us taking our classes or if they're our doula clients, to educators who were doulas or nurses or midwives first. And Care sort of alluded to this earlier, that experience in the birth room, it cannot be replicated. It cannot be overstated how important that is. They really can't get it anywhere else. And so when we have new educators reach out to us, we're like, I just, I had a baby and then I went and took a hypnobirthing training or a birthing from within training or whatever it is. And I'm looking for students. Care will often say, go take a doula training, go attend some births. That's not only how you're going to get clients, but how you're going to be the best educator to your client.
I won't push that. They're asking me for advice. So just so you know, I'm not, no, you have to do this. They're coming to me for advice.
But we know that it makes for the most well-rounded educator, somebody who is actually like boots on the ground in the room. And the best educators in our town, at least, are educators who were either doulas first or also doulas, or were midwives first or were nurses first. Because until you can really see in a very practical way how tools are used and also what parents are facing in terms of making decisions, conversations with providers, how the system works, what the experience is like, then everything else is just words on paper that you're repeating out loud, right? And so that's, I think, something that you can put on your wish list for an educator, that when you're interviewing educators and you're looking at their Yelp pages and you're reading their bios, that if you see one that was a midwife or was a doula or was a nurse first, put a little check by that, because it is going to add something to that class that an educator who was not any of those things isn't going to be bringing to the table. So it's just a little something that we like to get families thinking about when they're looking for classes. And Kara and I were doula educators. And so that gives us a lot of real world knowledge. We have so many anecdotal stories for things that parents might bring up when they're asking for examples of this type of birth or this type of outcome, or how would you handle this? How would I handle this in the real world? That the thing that you just taught me, we could say, well, we have a family that did XYZ and we saw families do this and we saw families do this because we have seen it. And that really just cannot be overstated how beneficial that is to us as teachers as well as to our
And
students.
one thing that you're going to learn by reading reviews, whether they be on Google or Yelp and their educator's website, are they biased towards things? You read my website and my bias screams so loud, get educated. It's not even funny. It doesn't say scoot by and hire a doula. It says get educated, hire a doula, know your options. Like it screams it. You know, every once in a while something will pop up and I'm like, "Ooh, I need to let my students know that that's a big thing for me." Right? Whether it's relational to my background with my baby or my kid or my birth or whatever it is.
Induction.
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, I do have a bias with induction because when my mom had her induction with me, she didn't have the education. She didn't have the information. It was a really hard birth for both of us. Let's put it that way. There's probably a reason that I'm in birth work. I was swayed back. And yeah, which is why I created a class on induction, because I need you to know that it's a lot bigger than anyone's going to tell you. And that it's not a 9 to 5, show up at 9, have a baby by 5. That's very rare. It could be 3 or 4 days. No one wants to tell you that. Yeah, let's not even go down that rabbit hole. But thank you, Ashley. You're right. That induction is a big
But
one
we
for
wear
me.
our biases on our sleeves. Like you said, your biases get educated. You're very open and honest about your things. But the thing about biases is it's okay to have them, right? It's okay to have your filters that you see the world through or teach through, as long as you're upfront and as long as you're using those biases to help create the best education for your families, which I feel like we really try to do. But we will see people put stuff on their website about, I only serve families doing this, or I only teach families planning this type of birth, or I will not serve families that are doing X, Y, and Z. And that is basically removing options from families who might just be looking for a different type of birth than what they're looking
I'm
for.
so grateful they're putting that on your website. That's not your person. Please put that on your website so that everyone up front knows ahead of time. That's fantastic. Yeah, transparency in everything when it comes to education. Absolutely.
And if it's not clear, ask those questions, right? What is your class designed for? Who do you typically serve? And if they say, I get most of my clients from home birth midwives and I really gear my classes towards home births, if you're planning a hospital birth, that's not the class for you. And so make sure you're asking, seeking things. If you see things on their websites or their Yelps that you're like, oh, that's a little bit of a red flag, that's something worth exploring. It doesn't necessarily mean they're not the educator for you, but it's something that you want to reach out and ask about. But like Kira said, we kind of keep our biases on her.
I should just make t-shirts.
Right
Yeah, we
out
should
front.
we should
It's
wear it
right
on a
out there.
t-shirt. And my last thing that I'm going to say is make sure the class isn't stuck in a 10-year deficit, meaning that class was written 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and evidence and science has way exceeded those old methods and ideas and even the game plan of how to have a birth. Science goes so fast. And I also want to say there's a balance with science, right? What has worked for us for millennia in our tribes and in our communities and our villages didn't need science. We just knew it worked, right? Now we back it up with science, which is constantly changing, but have a balance there too, because what has always worked for us, we innately knew because it's kept us on the planet. So just make sure that class curriculum is up to date because you all have access to Google, Bing, everything. You can look everything up. And if you find that, wait a second, that PubMed study was like last year, totally not what we were taught last week, bring it up to your educator's attention. I'd rather you know that ahead of time, but sometimes we don't know. But if it has been a curriculum that has not evolved over time, that's going to be to your detriment rather than moving you forward.
And I think when we talk about evidence, right, it's not even necessarily all the most up to date procedures and stuff like that, because sometimes what the evidence shows us is that we need to be doing less, right? So when a class is, let's say, preparing a family that they're going to make you get IV fluids. And we know actually that's not standard at any of the hospitals locally anymore. They do not start IV fluids when you go into the hospital.
At least here in San Diego, right? That might be different in your neck of the woods.
Yeah. But we know that teaching in San Diego that that's not standard. They don't offer fluids probably because they're too expensive. They don't want to pay for it, whatever it is. But they don't offer that right off the bat anymore, right? But if a family comes walking and be like, I will not be receiving IV fluids, and they're really combative because the class taught them they're going to try to put IV fluids in your arm and blah, blah, blah. Evidence isn't necessarily what are the most newest up to date sciencey things we can do to you, but actually evidence is coming out supporting doing less. And there are hospitals that are following that evidence and making changes. And we should also be making changes to reflect that in our curriculum as well. Even in terms of birth preparation, some of the stuff that we were teaching people to do physically with their bodies or pushing positions or different types of breathing that we have learned through evidence that actually some of these things work better. Some of these things are better at preventing tearing or managing pain or whatever it is that we expect providers to sort of learn and grow and follow evidence. As educators, we have to be doing the same thing and updating our curriculum, looking at the newest studies coming out and changing our books, changing our paperwork, and changing what we teach to reflect like what the evidence is showing us, as well as what are our local hospitals offering, so that we are giving families the most up-to-date information and we're not just stuck in the past. And then they go and go, actually, my hospital didn't offer me any of that stuff. Obviously, my teacher doesn't know that, right? Because they're not staying up to date on what is being offered and what families are actually dealing with. So you want to look for a curriculum that
And one of
evolves.
the things that I love about the internet and modern day is that the nurses that are taking care of you 90% of the time, right? Docs come in right at the end, midwives right at the end. The nurses that are there are now looking at what are these natural birthers doing? Oh, what's that position? Oh, what's spinning babies? So they are getting more curriculum to help you in the hospital because they're seeing more things come in. Because parents are more educated and they're doing different things, nurses want to know what that is, either to say that's a load of crap and we're not doing that because XYZ is happening, or, oh my gosh, I could really use that to support a mom if she's coming in and she's uncomfortable. Like I have found that the nurses really are, at least in our area, jumping on board and getting more educated with what families want because it's more of a woman support kind of a thing now, at least here. And I've appreciated that we've even had spinning babies trainings in our hospitals here and them getting more outside education to help us when we go into the hospital.
So, the last kind of thing that we want you to be looking for in a class is what are they offering that extends beyond the time that you're spending together in class? So, we already talked about sometimes the timing of your class isn't perfect, where you are left with sort of a gap of time when class ends before you have your baby. Or maybe you're just a person that does well where you get the information in class, but homework and continuing resources really help you connect with the information. So, a really good childbirth class should offer resources that go beyond the classroom that you can access, whether that's handouts, whether that's a book, whether that's videos, Instagram posts, any type of materials that they can offer you to continue to connect you with the ideas and continue to keep everything fresh for you for the birth that you're planning. And we want you to look for a class that's going to give you as many resources as they can to help keep all of this really fresh and in the front of your mind. And I know we all thought we got away from homework when we left school, but a little bit of homework can be really helpful with both you and your partner connecting with your baby. And again, really honing in those tools. So, like for our class, we have practice that they take home in terms of practicing their breathing, practicing touch, practicing movement. And we also have them do exercises exploring connection, exploring finding their voice. And then we have lots of videos. I mean, we have such a well curated library of videos that we send with them to hopefully keep them off of Google and off of YouTube rabbit holes, but still seeing births that really reinforce the type of birth that they might want and watching videos that revisit the breathing, revisit the positions, revisit the touch. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily technology, if it is just a book, if it is just handouts, but what are they offering you that's going to help continue to keep you connected to this curriculum as you enter the birth room?
Yeah, we don't shy away from homework in our class. I definitely let families know that. It's a college course in 5 weeks. So just so you know, it's an accelerated summer course, but you'll be glad you had the education. If you put the time into
And
it,
it's sexy and fun. Even the homework is sexy and fun. Sex is one of the homework
it is actually.
assignments that Care Put gives out.
The more sex everybody has, the more orgasms everybody has, everybody's better. Just the whole world is better. So yeah, we
Exactly.
don't shy away from
Exactly.
touch. So we do have all these questions and everything summed up in a PDF. We will link it in the show notes, and as well as some studies that talk about childbirth education and better outcomes with childbirth education. Please don't let your fear hold you back from getting educated. If that is one theme that I would love to be through every single podcast episode we have, is don't let fear stop you in your tracks. Own what you're going to be doing and have a safe and sexy birth, because you don't have to be scared the whole time you birth. It's something that we do. It is a little unnerving because it's unknown, but it doesn't have to be full of fear, and it doesn't have to stop you in your tracks. And we'll see everybody next week.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.